Hello, and welcome to Central Booking, where writers and readers are the authority. I'm your host, John Valeri. Prepare to be inspired, my friends. Today I'm joined in conversation by Laura Thoma. Her many titles include Certified Life Coach, Self-Love Advocate, and Playwright, and her play, Magpie, based on an essay written many years ago, was recently published by Next Stage Press. Magpie is the story of Magnolia, or Maggie, a young woman beginning to take control of her own narrative with the guidance of her therapist. It's a journey that finds Maggie confronting her mother, making peace with her father, and discovering herself in the process. A former dancer, performer, and choreographer, Laura had to rewrite her own story when a career-ending knee injury necessitated change. Fortunately, a longtime love of storytelling and the visual arts led her to a personal and professional reinvention, first as a photographer and later as a life coach, motivational speaker, and writer. Laura is the author of several self-help books, as well as Mastering the Art of Self-Expression, an interactive creative journaling workbook designed to empower readers to reconnect to their authentic selves. Magpie, though fiction, draws on those deep emotional truths that underlie the most poignant works of art. In getting to know Laura Thoma, I'd bet that you might just learn, or rediscover, a little something about yourself too. So let's take that first step together. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Central Booking. You are in for a treat. Today I am speaking to playwright Laura Thoma, who is the author of Magpie, which is available right now from Next Stage Press. Welcome to the show, Laura.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Haha, you say that now.
I do.
It's so funny. I feel weird referring to you as playwright because you are so many things. Like, I know you as so many things, so to specify just one of them, but I think we'll probably get back to, some of the others in this discussion. But I figured, I wanted to start with the word magpie because it's meaningful on multiple levels throughout this play. So I'm wondering if you can tell us how you see this title as it relates to your protagonist, Maggie, and also sort of her characteristics and life circumstances.
Wow, that's a big question.
Isn't it? Don't you?
Yes. Well,
This is the
Magpie,
interview.
her
One and done.
name, right? And done. Her name is Maggie, as you already said. Magnolia is her full name, and so her mother always called her Magpie. She's from the South. I'm originally from the South, so I have a lot of connections to all the great, fabulous nicknames that happen down there. And but magpies, as you know, are very intelligent birds, and birds that have all sorts of interesting traits about them. And one of them specifically is they are the only bird that can see their own reflection, which plays a part in her story eventually. So yeah, that's what I'll say about the magpie.
Sure, I love that. I love, titles that are sort of loaded with meaning, and the more you get into the story, the more you can really appreciate the nuances. So your character, Maggie, Magpie, Magnolia, I love that she's all these things. And I love that she's not just like a Margaret,
Right? Yeah.
Magnolia is such a great name, and it is so Southern. But so she is on a journey of discovery, and it's sort of both internal and external discovery. So I'm wondering if you can tell me what it is that she's seeking and how, sort of one thing is kind of dependent on the other.
Yeah, that's a great and very interesting question. I mean, truthfully, I think what she's really seeking is herself, to finally be comfortable, to finally um, know who she is truly, and to claim her own narrative, which I think is something many of us struggle with, and many of us are defined by our families and are kind of told our narrative at some point, and either we believe it. Some people believe it, and that's it for forevermore. They to go with the bird metaphors here. We'll stick with the raven for a moment. They believe it, and that's it. And I think for Maggie, she's gotten to a place where she's actually questioning it, and she wants to know. She wants answers to questions that have never been answered before, and she's somebody who's willing to do the work. So for her, it's definitely a journey because she's ready to find out what it means to be her, whether it looks like what she thinks it does or not.
Sure. And of course, speaking of family, I wanted to ask you about the dynamic between Maggie and her mother. Mama, how does their relationship represent both the different manifestations of grief, but also the different needs associated with those? And then, while the characters almost seem entirely dissimilar, what do you see as being their, core commonalities?
Wow, John, big question, big questions. They're so good. I know my mind's like,
Oh, you're kind.
um, wow, so many questions. Okay.
I can
Yeah, I
repeat if
think,
you'd like. That was a
yeah,
two-pronged one.
repeat that one more time, because
Sure.
there was a
So
lot there.
first,
There's good
if you could
stuff.
just tell me, a little bit about the relationship between Maggie and her mother, and how they're both sort of dealing with grief, but of course, grief manifests itself in different ways. So it
Absolutely.
shows in different ways, and they both sort of need different things.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, particularly their grief, because it's family grief, but I don't think Mama really sees it as family grief. Like Mama sees it as her personal grief and something she's carrying, whereas Maggie, because Maggie was very young, and so Maggie feels this hole in her life that I don't think Mama necessarily understands.
Sure.
um, and so they're both in it, but I don't know that either one of them totally get the perspective of the other person's grief, because I mean, we've all been through grief, and grief is very personal. So I think they also approach it very differently, and that may have to do with being mother daughter, because of course, mother is trying to, really push Maggie to be a survivor, and they needed to survive and they needed to go forward. So that's where she lives, and Maggie lives somewhere very different. So I think at their core, they're probably very similar women. They're both very strong. They're both very stubborn. They're both very smart. They both, you know, they think their way is the right way. And I hope, at least in the play, that there is a moment where they do learn to respect, or to understand at least, where their differences lie.
Sure. And I love that you say that, underneath it all, they're probably both very similar because, that makes me think of all these people who, for whatever reason, butt heads and they can't seem to really understand each other. And then us looking in at them, it's like, it's because you're so much alike. You just don't see it, but we all do.
I think
Uh,
that's very true for most of us when that's happening, right?
yeah.
We don't,
Want to
yeah,
say
we
it even
can't see it.
clearly. There it is.
Mhm. Right?
Yeah, and I wanted to ask you too about a different relationship dynamic that's also very prevalent throughout the story. So, there is much of this takes place in conversation with Maggie and her therapist. So I wanted to ask you what she gets out of that relationship, what that relationship provides for her that other relationships don't. And also, how does it empower Maggie to become her own wise mind, as is sort of referred to throughout the play?
Yeah. John, you're so deep. These are amazing questions. I think the short answer is kind of that it just gives her space. In within her relationship of her therapist, there is someone who is allowing her the space to have her voice, to be a brat at times, to push back without silence, or without the relationship being shut down. So there's this space to kind of be a child, and to try to figure out what she feels and feel her feelings, because I think in her relationship with her mama, that there's not a lot of space. It's, say what you need to say in this small window, and if I like it, I'm there and I'm going to listen. If I don't, I'm not. And so I think the therapist really, much like the magpie, is partially a part of her mirror, is a part of what allows her to begin to see herself and understand herself.
Sure. And if you don't mind, I wanted to ask you too about the symbolism of the light that adorns the
Mm.
therapist's desk, because it's another one of those, beautiful, seemingly small things that's very poignant throughout the story. So I was wondering if you could speak to, how that's symbolically important.
Yes, I have to say I've not seen this. We were supposed to do it on stage right before the pandemic, so I have not actually seen it on stage. So I'm very excited for that particular element, because I'm hoping it will have the impact that it does on the page. But the idea is that therapy and her therapist are this thing that help hold the space, that she doesn't really know who she is in the beginning, and so the light is turned on to kind of say, this is like a flashlight, this is your safety, this helps you hold this space that you're creating, this sacred space. with the idea that as she does more things that are for her benefit and that align with her, her internal light will grow and she will eventually be able to hold her own light. But in the beginning of the play, she can't. So the idea is that that light stays on, and we'll see on stage, but that the light's dim and that light is always on. And then at some moment, it is not. So,
Well, that I can't wait to see. I'm probably
yeah.
almost as excited as you are. And I wanted to ask you too, because it's funny, you look at something like this and it's relatively short. And I remember a friend of mine once said that, easy reading makes for damn hard writing. And I try never to forget that because, you read a play or a story or a book and it can be over so quickly, for us, the reader, but there's so much effort that went into it to make it what it is. And I feel like for something like this, like you have to know a little something about a lot of things to make it all come together. And so I
Yeah.
wanted to sort of ask you about personal experience versus research, because there's a lot at play here. We talked about, the grieving process. Um, you know, there's the intricacies of therapy where if you don't get that right, anybody who's been to therapy is going to tell you that you didn't
Right.
get that right. And even, there's a thread about the US Navy. So can you talk about those threads and what you had to do to make them authentic on the page?
Absolutely. Well, and whoever said that is brilliant because yes, I always say like writing like that that's so succinct, which is what hopefully a finished play is. It's a lot. It takes a lot to get it there. This started as a essay many years ago. So the threads are really interesting. Some of it is personal based. So some of it, I have personally been in therapy, but that's funny because when I had different readings all the way along the way, there were people who were like, no, that's not what a therapist does. No, that's not right. So I think in general, that's challenging with any piece that you're doing because people have their own experience with it. Um, the Navy, I definitely did some research on that and have some family history with that. So I had some of those references. And yeah, it's so interesting to try to track all the threads too and keep them authentic but also fictional. I mean, it is also a story, with characters that I'm creating. So it's that balance of, creating the world that Maggie's in and making sure everything fits in that world, but also ringing true as well.
Sure. Um,
Yeah.
and so let me ask you just about sort of the framework of a play, because it's very unique. And I wanted to see if you wouldn't mind talking, obviously one, there needs to be a lot of stage direction. That's a big part of it. I always think of like, the double D's, direction and then dialogue, because plays are really dialogue driven. So I was going to ask you how you endeavor to capture, both the authenticity of voice, but also the urgency that you need to propel a story forward.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it it is a process. It is still something I am actually learning as a playwright because it is all about the actual structure of the play. That's what helps, or story structure in general, helps keep the action and the movement and the conflict and making sure there are obstacles. And that keeps us going in a way. And then the dialogue, I love writing dialogue. That is actually one of the things that comes fairly natural to me. So that part is less challenging for me than keeping the movement in the play, which I find a little bit trickier.
Sure. And that's a really good gift to have, because I find as a reader, one of the few things that will take me completely out of a story, is if dialogue doesn't ring true. If you have a 20 something talking like she's an 80 something,
Yeah. Oh,
but
that's
that never
interesting.
happens in this play. It's a good
Oh,
gift
thank you.
to have. So wanted to expand on something that you sort of already touched on, but I was going to say that, writing tends to be a very solitary endeavor until it isn't.
Absolutely.
And at some
Exactly.
point, you decide, okay, this is ready for other eyes. And I think, if I understand correctly, that you were able to sort of workshop this play and get feedback that way. So I was wondering if you could talk about the benefit of sort of that collaborative process, both creatively and sort of emotionally, once you have the right set of eyes looking at it.
Yeah, again, another amazing question. It's interesting, especially with playwriting, because you need, I think more so than novel writing, you need to hear actors read it. And you need it fairly early on to know what's going on. So for this, like I said, it started as an essay and then eventually it became a one act play. and it was a semifinalist, and I had people read it. So that was really cool because they sent me it was down in Florida. They sent me the video. So I got to see that. And then I was like, I think this is bigger than a one act. So I continued to work on it and workshopped it a lot. And eventually I was a playwright in residence. And then that was a really exciting time because for, I think it was 4 days, I would write, they would read it, I would go away and write, and they would read it. So that kind of, it was like this direct feedback, which was really powerful. And I felt like it got it to a certain spot. And then I was like, okay, now I need one-on-one help. So I actually contacted an old teacher of mine in Chicago and said, this is where I am. I need deadlines. I need feedback. And she's somebody I really respect. So I hooked up with her, and that's how I got it into the final shape, because I just needed, like, I don't know how you said it, but it's exactly that. I needed a trusted voice. I needed a person, because they're come, general feedback is really helpful for a while, but then you need somebody who is getting what you're trying to do. And that's what I needed at that moment. Somebody going, you're saying you want to write this, but this is on the page.
Right, right. And and that is so helpful because I think, you know, sort of the other side to that coin, as you sort of mentioned, is you can get so much feedback and a lot of it can be contradictory that it's like, then, do you
Absolutely.
trust your instincts? Do you trust what people are telling you? And if people are telling you two completely opposite things, it's like, oh, so yeah, to have that one trusted voice, I think is, critical. Um,
Absolutely.
and I did want to ask you about the experience of, sort of seeing Magpie brought to life, because I think within the last year, there was sort of a virtual reading with actors who, inhabited these characters and did a live run through of the play. And I was fortunate enough to see that. And that was a really cool experience. So I can only imagine, for you as the writer and creative, creator of this piece, that must have been a bit surreal. So can you talk a little bit about that? And does that, seeing somebody else's interpretation of your work, does that change your relationship with it at all?
An interesting question. Yeah, this was very interesting because I was supposed to do it in person, and then the pandemic happened. And the silver lining to that was I actually got to ask any actor I wanted, because I didn't have to be here anymore. So the person who played Howard was actually a gentleman that I worked with when I was 12 and when I first started doing theater, and I'm a huge fan of his. He's an amazing actor. He's now, I think, in his mid to late 80s. I mean, and it was just so exciting to have him, and he was perfect for the role. And he just made me feel, I don't know, to hear somebody, when you hear an actor click in with your writing, there is just nothing better than that. And I thought all of them, personally, I thought they were all just such good fits. So it was so helpful and exciting, and it does change your relationship, but it makes me even more excited and anxious to get it on its feet, because I know that when I see it, because obviously plays are people moving around, I'm like, does it work? I think it works, but I don't totally know until I
Right.
see them moving. So yeah, it's such an amazing, and I don't know what the right word is. Like, it's such an honor to have actors read your work. And when it is a good fit, I mean, you can tell right away, wow, that's not working. Because when a good actor, I mean, they can make anything work, first of all, but you can just hear your own rhythm, and you can hear something that doesn't fit. And that's such a gift, because you can't, when you read it over and over, you're like, oh, I think it feels like it, and you can make it work. But when an actor actually does it, it's like, wow, so
Right.
powerful and such a gift.
Yeah, and I have to say it was an interesting experience for me because I feel like the majority of the time, I read the source material before I see a play or a movie, and this was sort of the reversal. I got to see the reading before this
Yeah. Oh,
existed
interesting.
for purchase. And what really surprised me was the fact that as I was reading this, I was hearing those actors' voices in my
Oh, I
head.
love
I didn't
that.
expect to, but it all sort of came rushing back, and that was an interesting experience to have.
Oh, that's so neat.
Yeah, it was kind of cool. Like I totally was not expecting that, but I heard Magpie in my head and Mama, and it was really really cool. Um,
Well, and
but
I should say, like, that was Deborah Mott and Eileen Lawless and David Hamilton and Alan Sater were the four actors who did it. So they were just very, and all had very distinct voices. Wouldn't you agree? Like, I think like that's one thing that was so lovely on Zoom, which is such a strange medium for doing plays, but they all had good voices, which I think makes a difference in this medium more so than
Right.
necessarily on stage.
Yeah, very memorable, which is cool. So, when we began, I said that it was sort of weird to refer to you as a playwright just because I know you as so many things. So I sort of wanted to come back to some of those other things and have a bit broader of a conversation, if you
Sure.
don't mind.
No,
But
not at all.
so I wanted to sort of take you all the way back because your first career, or one of your first careers, was actually as a dancer. Unfortunately, there was sort of an injury that led you to explore sort of other realms of creativity. If
I'm
you
with
don't
you.
mind just, sharing your story of reinvention and
Yeah,
then how that might help, other people who are sort of at an impasse and they want to reinvent themselves too, or they want to try something different and they just need to sort of, find the courage and the wherewithal to do that.
absolutely. I think like you said, I was a dancer in my first life. I was classically trained as a ballerina, and then I went on and I did musical theater, and I did it for decades, and I taught and I performed, and when I was injured, I kind of I was just done. I was saturated. So I walked away, which was kind of crazy. I had started dancing at the age of 4, and I had been in professional theater since I was 12. So I, and it really was it was, a dark night of the soul kind of moment. I had no idea if I was a creative person in any other way. That's all I had ever done, which is not totally true, but that's what we tell ourselves. Like, that's all I've ever done because it had been my focus. But of course, I always liked to doodle. I had always written. I had always journaled. I had done, as all creative people, and it's all people because all people are creative. We'll just say that. We'll just leave that there for a moment. But I really didn't. I didn't know that. I didn't know it. So it was quite a journey to find my next step. And I worked with many life coaches, and I actually got into photography next. I did visual stuff, and I owned a business and I made jewelry out of photographs. It was very successful. And one day I was backing out of our driveway in Chicago, and I had a sign on the back of my car for my business, and I was like, I don't want to be doing this. And it was crazy to me because I was successful and I enjoyed it, but I just knew this is not what I want to be doing. So I went to see one of my coaches I was working with, and one of them, I don't remember who, was like, "You should be a coach." And I was like, "What?" And it kind of all started clicking because I realized how much I missed teaching, which was something I had done for a long time, and coaching is a form of teaching. I love working with people. I love helping people reach their potential. So for anybody who's, and that, I mean, mainly what I do is work with people who are in crossroads or who are struggling to claim who they are. And I don't know. I think the biggest thing to know is that you really have all your answers, and it doesn't feel that way. It feels like it's outside of you somewhere. And that's where we get a little bit lost. So, the biggest thing I always say to anybody at that moment is creativity is your friend. It doesn't matter if you can draw or you can't draw, like doodle, get in a journal, write down your feelings, all that good stuff. Pen to paper is always, for me, the answer. And I really try to teach my clients that because there's something magic. And I love, I mean, my playwriting and all that, almost all of my writing I do with, a keyboard. And I love that. But there's something very different when you start putting pen to paper. You can't hide from yourself because
Sure.
you're right there.
And I love that about you. I mean, I feel like I see your face and I'm inspired and I want to be creative, and I don't have that reaction to, you know, a ton of things. But I think that people really get a sense of your energy and your enthusiasm and that genuineness. It comes through. And I was going to ask you, about the fact that you are a certified life coach, that you are a self-love advocate, that people, can study and learn from you, be empowered by you. So if
Absolutely.
people were interested in exploring that or pursuing that further, how best might they connect with you?
Yeah, the best way is my website is lauratoma.com, but you can go through there. You can Laura Thoma Coaching at Gmail is how to reach me. I'm on everything. I'm on Instagram and Facebook and everywhere else, so you can find me any way that way. And yeah, it's so interesting. I love that you said that I'm a self-love advocate, because that's really, it took me a long time to figure out who am I? How do I say this in a way that really represents what I believe? But that for me, which was a mission that I did when I was young, when I was probably 18, 20-ish, was the first time I ever heard the term self-love. And I was like, excuse me, what is that? I don't know what this is. So it's a very powerful philosophy and a very powerful way to live. It totally changes everything.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, I encourage, yeah. I've actually been thinking about trying to create a program for writers,
Oh,
specifically for writers around it, because I think many writers, we fall into all sorts of stereotypes that we have been taught. And it's so important to be our own advocates.
right. I know you really don't have to be the tortured artist to be a writer.
No,
You can break that.
absolutely.
So I wanted to also to follow up on something that you touched on briefly a few minutes ago, talking about sort of the visual arts too, because a play obviously is words, but you deal very much in imagery as well. So I wanted to ask you what you see as being the relationship between the two, words and imagery, and how, sort of working in one might either enhance or unlock your ability to work with another.
That's really interesting. I think they're very intertwined. At least, I mean, they always have been for me. I can remember, this is really strange, but I can remember laying on the ground with my mom listening to Peter and the Wolf, and always like I was probably like the Boston Pops or somebody playing, but being able to visualize. So I think for me, visual, I think, is my point of entry, which I didn't know that for years and years and years. I didn't know I was a visual person, which sounds really strange now, but I didn't. And I think for most of it's probably one comes before the other. Like some people are words first, and I don't know. I don't know. I would guess I'm image first, but they're just very married. I mean, part of my process as a playwright is I always create a visual image when I'm just starting a play. I usually get the image. And the interesting thing about Magpie, I'm trying to, I don't think I have it sitting around. I usually have it here somewhere. It is a magpie looking in a mirror. But that wasn't the first image I created. And it was actually an amazing director I worked with who was like, I think the image that you have is not the best one for the play. And I was like, oh, so, but it's usually a working, like some people do working titles. I do working images, because the image helps me connect to what I'm doing word wise. What is it for you? Can I ask you? Do you have visual when you're writing?
Sometimes it's interesting because I don't see myself as being artistically visual. Like, I mean, I can barely draw like a stick figure.
Me
I think
neither.
that
Me neither.
I'm more visual than I think that I am. But I find that if I can see something in my mind's eye, it's easier for me to transfer that to the page.
Yeah.
Or a lot of times, if I'm writing something that's fiction, I sort of see it as a movie in my head. And so then when I write it, you want to stay true to the dialogue and you want to sort of have that narrative momentum. So I guess just because, I can't draw anything that looks like art, I guess I see it in my head, and that helps me to try to put it down.
Yeah. Well, and I think that is a really important distinction, because one of the things in all my teaching of workshops and stuff, many people will fight you that, right, that they will take you to the mat over the fact that they are not an artist. And I can be okay with that, but you are creative, and that's the important part, because I can't draw, period. I'm not, when you look at people who are artists in that way, but I am creative, and I can create. What I always say with my clients is create a visual representation of that. So it can be abstract, it can be whatever, but that's what holds the energy and the power. And just from what you're saying, so many people, right? Writers probably do that, have that vision in their head, and then they are writing like the internal movie, getting it down into words and onto paper. That's really interesting. So you're creative. You may not consider yourself an artist, though I would argue with you about that, but we'll do that another time.
Yes,
But
we'll do that
yes,
in a live forum. People can pay for tickets, get your
exactly.
popcorn, we'll duke it out. But that's what I love, speaking to other creatives, you get so many different perspectives, which is really wonderful. All right, so a couple more questions if you don't mind.
Yes. No, not,
So
oh my goodness.
I would assume that a lot of people know that you were married to Chris Wolak, who is half of the book Cougars with Emily Fine.
Yes.
I do it so well, I cannot, but I got it down. And she too is very creative and sort of infinitely curious. And I wanted to ask you if you can talk about the benefits of, sharing your life with somebody who really gets that compulsion or that drive or that need for artistic exploration.
Yeah, it's amazing. Short and simple. It really is because I've had other relationships in my life and most of them ended because there was not curiosity. And I always say I define myself as a seeker. I'm somebody who's interested in learning, and that it changes, it ebbs and flows what you're interested in, but having somebody else who understands the value of that and the value of that not only makes you a more interesting person to yourself, but of course then brings a more interesting person into the relationship. And I don't know, curiosity is just, it's a beautiful thing, and knowledge is a beautiful thing. And having somebody else, I'm amazed by Chris and everything. She's so smart. And so, our interests are very different, but we also have similar interests. So that is also, I love that because we both have our own places and spaces where we feel, I don't know, that we feel that are ours and we can explore. And then we have places that we can share. And I think there's something very special about that because, being a married person, it's so important to have, you within the couple and you just as you. So I love that part.
Hashtag dynamic duo. You two are great. I always feel exhausted, like thinking about what you're both all doing all the time. I'm like, my goodness, it's funny. My wife always says, I wish I had passions like you do, but she does. It's just like different, like, gardening or travel. Not that we do any of
Yes,
that anymore, but, it just manifests itself in different ways. It's just not
absolutely.
books arriving at the door every week, but that doesn't mean you don't have passion.
Well, that's it. And I think that is the perfect word, right? It is passion. I mean, passion is so wonderful. And that is what keeps people learning about whatever they're interested in. It's so exciting to continue to want to learn. I mean, that's always my thing is I want to get better at it. I tend to think of I guess in an artist's way, I love the idea of people being a novice. Like that was a huge thing for me as somebody who, when I was younger, I learned very quickly, but I'm not a good learner, if that makes sense. Like I don't know how to learn. Like I was great until I got to I think to like high school, and then I was like, ruh-roh. Like I don't know how to study. I don't because everything just came fairly naturally to me. So as an adult, I've actually had to learn and embrace being a novice. What does it mean to begin to learn something from the beginning? And am I okay with the fact that I may never master it? And what do I want to put in the time to actually master? Because not everything I'm doing do I actually care if I ever master. So those are interesting. The novice mindset is fascinating to me because it's very different than what, where most of us live. We think we should already know how to do it when we
Oh, I know.
start.
It's interesting. I'm always, reminding myself if you can find enjoyment in the process, it doesn't matter if it turns out to be a masterpiece or like something that nobody ever sees, because there is sort of, gratification in just doing.
Absolutely.
I try to tell people it's okay to just do. And then I'm like, you should tell that to yourself and listen for, once in your life.
Right. Oh, it's so true. That's one of the things I do in my coaching. I have a technique of journaling called CBBT, and the whole purpose is basically self-witnessing because it's just that, right? It's learning to do things for ourselves, to just do them, and that it's like what? Like that's hard. We're so conditioned to doing things for results and for other people and external validation, and to begin to do them for yourself is a really powerful exercise and practice to have.
Sure. And I feel like, a lot of people give good advice and are very wise. And I feel like, I can tell a lot of people things that are of benefit to them. And then I think, and I'm like, you know what to say, but do you follow through on any of these things yourself? No.
I bet that's not totally true.
Maybe
It's
some of them, a small fraction.
right. It's a practice. It's much easier to see it in other people than it is in ourselves, right? I mean, it's easier to go, oh, that's what I should be doing. You should do this. I should listen to myself.
That's what I do after these shows. I think about all these gems that people have given me, and I feel like I should absorb them like a sponge. I'm like, this is such a gift. You need to use it. So, speaking of that, that actually lends itself very well to my next question. And I think that, you already spoke to this a little bit, but I'm sure you can expand a little bit. But what I love to ask people is, what is the best advice that you ever got that you can recall? And then on the other hand, the best advice that you never got and had to learn for yourself, in terms of a creative or writing life?
Wow. Well, the best advice I never got was to love yourself like that. And I actually will say it's both, because I did eventually have someone say it to me, but I heard it first and I had never heard it, and I was like, this is wackadoo and I don't really understand what this means. And then I had an artist tell me, a woman who I've never been able to remember her name. I can picture her clear as day. I was doing a show with her and she was like, if you don't learn to love yourself, you're never going to get where you're going. And I was like, so yeah, I would say self-love is the biggest on both sides, really. I'm trying to think of other advice that people have given me over the years. I think the biggest that I got from a dance teacher once was to kind of, I don't think it was necessarily said this way, but to own your own strength. Like, I, as a dancer, was not naturally flexible, but I was very strong and I was kind of fearless. So that's where my strength was. And I spent a lot of time trying to be a different kind of dancer. And it's like, you need to own your strength. It's not like that. It's not that you can't learn other things, but you are unique. We're all unique. And that's so hard to remember sometimes. But no one else has your voice, especially as a writer. No one else sees it the way you see it. No one else can write it the way you write it. That's amazing when you think about it, because it's like, hey, nobody else can write my book. I mean, they really can't. It's hard to hold on to that, but it's true.
That's excellent advice. And I've asked this question of so many people, and I don't think that anybody's ever given me that answer before. And it's so great. I will be thinking about this later.
Good. Oh, excellent.
Yes.
Me too. See, I need to take my own advice. When I hear that, I think like, right? Yes. Yes.
That's right. This belongs in that book that you were going to write about, self-love for writers. I mean, it's writing itself right now. You just need
Right.
to describe this later, and you're on your way. So final question for you. I'm wondering if you can, tell us what it is that you are working on now and what we might be able to expect next from you.
Absolutely. So I'm working on multiple things. As far as plays, I'm working on a play called Years and Words, which is a play that I actually wrote years ago. It was my very first full-length play. I'm in love with this play. It is not good at the moment. I actually did NaNoWriMo when is NaNoWriMo? October? No, November. In November. And expanded it into a novel just for the mere fact to see if I could figure out the characters. So I did that, and now I'm trying to bring it back into a play. So I'm kind of obsessed with it right now, and I'm working a lot on structure, which is not my strength, and I'm thoroughly enjoying it. I'm trying to really let go of timeline, because it's going to take a long time, and I'm trying to just let that happen. And other writing, I'm writing a couple coaching books, so that's also a huge learning curve. I'm doing one in collaboration with another artist. We're writing a book. She and I have actually been friends for more than 10 years, but for 10 years we've read business books together. So we're actually writing a book on how to reach goals with a buddy. So many things in the work, nothing finished.
That's how it goes, but something will get there eventually. I feel like,
right?
The more you have in the works, the more you likely you are to have something to
Exactly.
fruition. That's terrific. Well, I'm going to hold it up again. Laura Thoma's Magpie. It is available right now from Next Stage Press. You have to read it. It's so good. And it sounds like you may be lucky enough to actually see it live on stage one of these days. So crossing fingers for that.
Yes,
Thank
please.
you so much for being here, Laura. It was a delight.
Thank you for having me. I love being here.
That's it for this episode of Central Booking. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss a thing.